The history of the people known today as the Aztecs is not a tale of simple, singular origin, but a complex narrative of migration, adaptation, political maneuvering, and military dominance, culminating in the establishment of a vast imperial network across Mesoamerica. They called themselves the Mexica, pronounced Mexica, and their journey begins not in the fertile valley of Mexico, but far to the north, in a place both mythical and real. The official Mexica legend, as recorded in sources like the Codex Boturini or Tira de la Peregrinación, roots their identity in Aztlán, the place of the herons or place of whiteness, an island said to be surrounded by a lake, a northern paradise that the Mexica were commanded to abandon by their patron deity, Huitzilopochtli, the god of sun and war. This departure was not an escape, but the beginning of a divine mandate, a grueling centuries-long migration that would define their destiny. While Aztlán is largely considered a myth of legitimation, historians and archaeologists recognize that this legend reflects the very real late arrival of the Mexica and other Nahua-speaking groups from the arid north, part of a larger ethnic phenomenon often grouped under the name Chichimeca, meaning barbarians or dog people, to the established civilized groups of the valley. This migration occurred in the tumultuous period following the collapse of the great Toltec capital of Tollan around 1150 to 1200 CE, which created a power vacuum in central Mexico. The Mexica were merely one of several waves of northern migrants seeking fertile lands and political status. Their language, Nahuatl, firmly belongs to the extensive Uto-Aztecan family, confirming their deep-rooted northern origins, possibly somewhere in modern-day North or Northwest Mexico, a compelling linguistic fact that lends weight to the overall migration theory, even if the specific location of Aztlán remains elusive and likely symbolic. As these persistent pilgrims entered the crowded valley of Mexico in the 13th century, they found a sophisticated, if fragmented, political landscape dominated by successor states to the Toltecs, such as the powerful city-states of Culhuacan, Azcapotzalco, and Texcoco. The Mexica were initially viewed with disdain, treated as latecomers and uncultured mercenaries. They survived by serving as hired soldiers for the established polities, earning a fearsome reputation for their martial prowess and fanatical devotion to Huitzilopochtli, whose demands for blood sacrifice shocked even their Mesoamerican contemporaries. During this time of servitude, they learned the political and cultural intricacies of the region, borrowing heavily from the intellectual and artistic traditions of the existing Nahua civilization, a process often termed Toltecization. A crucial early event was their brief, disastrous settlement near the city of Culhuacan, after they scandalously sacrificed the daughter of the Tlatoani, ruler of Culhuacan, whom they had been granted to rule as a minor queen. The enraged Culhuacanese drove the Mexica out, forced to flee into the swampy, uninhabitable region of the Great Lake Texcoco. They found refuge on a tiny, inhospitable island. According to the foundational myth, it was here in 1325 CE that they saw the sign promised by Huitzilopochtli, an eagle perched on a nopal cactus, devouring a serpent. This sacred vision marked the end of their wanderings and the beginning of their empire. On this muddy island, they founded their capital, Tenochtitlan, the place of the nopal cactus. The early years in Tenochtitlan were characterized by resilience and intensive innovation. To sustain a growing population on a small marshy island, the Mexica engineered an agricultural miracle, the chinampa system. These were artificial islands or floating gardens created by dredging the rich mud from the lake floor and layering it with decaying vegetation, forming incredibly fertile, highly productive plots that were irrigated by the lake itself. This ingenious technology allowed Tenochtitlan to feed its burgeoning population and generate significant surplus, forming the economic bedrock of their future power. Politically, the Mexica remained vassals, acknowledging the authority of the powerful Tepanec city-state of Azcapotzalco, whose ruler, Tezozomoc, shrewdly employed them as his primary military force. In 1375 CE, they solidified their status by installing their first Tlatoani, Acamapichtli, beginning a dynastic line tied to the noble lineage of Culhuacan, which offered a measure of legitimacy that transcended their Chichimeca roots. For the next two generations, the Mexica served Azcapotzalco, proving invaluable in its wars of expansion. However, this subservience contained the seeds of revolution. The death of Tezozomoc in 1426 CE led to a succession crisis in Azcapotzalco, which his son, Maxtla, resolved by becoming a tyrant, demanding excessive tribute and threatening the newly independent-minded Mexica. The pivotal moment in Mexica history arrived in 1428 CE. Under the charismatic leadership of their Tlatoani, Itzcoatl, and his brilliant chief advisor, Tlacaélel, the Mexica formed a momentous military and political alliance with the previously hostile city-states of Texcoco and the lesser city of Tlacopan. This coalition, known to history as the Triple Alliance or Ixcan Tlatoloyan, decisively defeated Maxtla and shattered the Tepanec hegemony. This victory marked the transition of the Mexica from vassals to imperial masters. The Triple Alliance was not an empire in the European sense, but a powerful military and economic confederation that was in reality heavily dominated by Tenochtitlan. Texcoco, under the wise poet king Nezahualcoyotl, received a 2/5 share of the tribute and maintained a focus on law and culture, while the minor Tlacopan received 1/5. Tenochtitlan, however, became the undisputed military and political core. The intellectual architect of the imperial project was Tlacaélel, who served 4 successive Tlatoanis. He is credited with a radical reinterpretation of Mexica history, ordering the burning of old codices and the creation of a new, revised history that placed the Mexica at the center of the Mesoamerican cosmos, divinely ordained to rule. From 1428 until the arrival of the Spanish in 1519, the Triple Alliance, driven primarily by Mexican military might, engaged in relentless campaigns of conquest. Under powerful Tlatoanes like Moctezuma II, also known as Moctezuma Ilhuicamina, R. 1440-1469, the empire expanded its reach from the Valley of Mexico southward into Oaxaca and Veracruz. Conquered regions were not integrated as full provinces but were required to pay tribute. Vast quantities of goods, ranging from foodstuffs and textiles to precious feathers, gold, jade, and, crucially, people for sacrifice. This tributary system, meticulously recorded in tribute lists like the Matricula de Tributos, was the engine of the empire's wealth and supported the opulence of Tenochtitlan. The city itself grew into a magnificent metropolis of possibly 200,000 people, a dazzling urban center built around the Templo Mayor, Great Temple, dedicated to both Huitzilopochtli and the rain god Tlaloc. Its complex network of canals, causeways, and markets, most famously the bustling market of Tlatelolco, astounded the Spanish. Society was rigidly stratified. At the top were the papaltin, nobles, who held political and military office and owned land, followed by the Macaholtin, commoners, farmers, artisans, and merchants. The Pochteca, long-distance merchants, held a unique, high-status position, often serving as imperial spies and diplomats. Despite the empire's grandeur, it suffered from fundamental weaknesses that the Spanish would soon exploit. First, the empire was held together by force and fear, not by assimilation. Many subjected city-states, or Oltepetl, resented the heavy tribute demands and the constant demand for sacrificial victims. They remained autonomous in many respects and were merely awaiting an opportunity to revolt. Second, the empire had never managed to conquer certain strategically placed enemies, most notably the independent, powerful state of Tlaxcala, a Nahua-speaking people who became the Spanish conquistadors' most critical and dedicated indigenous allies. The reign of the last powerful Tlatoani before the conquest, Ahuitzotl, R. 1486-1502, saw the empire reach its greatest territorial extent. But his successor, Moctezuma II, Xocoyotzin, R. 1502-1520, inherited an empire plagued by internal resentments and external threats. A refined and deeply religious ruler, Moctezuma II tried to centralize power further and impose greater control over the nobility, perhaps contributing to underlying tensions at court. He was on the throne when, in April 1519, the ominous news arrived. Strangers, pale and bearded, had landed on the Gulf Coast. The arrival of Hernán Cortés and his small band of Spanish conquistadors was an event of cataclysmic proportions, setting the stage for the downfall of the Mexica world. Moctezuma's initial response was marked by fatal indecision. He sent ambassadors bearing rich gifts, hoping to appease the newcomers and induce them to leave, but the sight of gold only inflamed Spanish greed and ambition. The common historical interpretation, rooted in Spanish accounts, suggests that Moctezuma believed Cortés might be the returned god Quetzalcoatl, but contemporary historians argue that this was a myth popularized later to explain the conquest and that Moctezuma's hesitations were born of practical political and strategic uncertainty, grappling with an unprecedented threat. Cortés shrewdly established alliances almost immediately, capitalizing on the deep-seated hatred that subject peoples, particularly the Zempoalans and most fatefully, the Tlaxcalans, held for the Mexica. The Tlaxcalans provided Cortés with thousands of seasoned warriors, intelligence, and crucial logistical support, turning the small Spanish force into the head of a massive indigenous army. In November 1519, Cortés and his Tlaxcalan allies marched into Tenochtitlan, where Moctezuma, in an act of baffling hospitality or perhaps strategic necessity, received them peaceably. The Spanish took the Tlatoani hostage inside his own palace, ruling through him for months and plundering the city's gold. The delicate situation exploded into open warfare in June 1520, following the massacre of the Mexican nobility during a religious festival by the ruthless Spanish lieutenant Pedro de Alvarado while Cortés was briefly away. Enraged, the Mexica rose up in revolt. Moctezuma II was killed, either by his own people for his perceived treachery or by the Spanish during the chaos. Forced to flee the city under cover of night, the Spanish suffered catastrophic losses on what became known as La Noche Triste, the Sad Night. Cortés, however, managed to escape and, crucially, maintain his alliance with the Tlaxcalans, regrouping and preparing for a final assault. The decisive factor in the Spanish victory was not steel and gunpowder, but disease. While the Spanish were preparing for the siege, a smallpox epidemic, unknowingly introduced by an infected African slave with the Spanish force, swept through the unprepared indigenous population who lacked any acquired immunity. The epidemic killed perhaps 1/3 to 1/2 of the population of the Valley of Mexico, including the newly installed Tlatoani, Cuitláhuac. The political and social structure of the Mexica resistance was decimated. Under the final Tlatoani, the young and courageous Cuauhtémoc, the Mexica fought a desperate, bloody defense of their island capital, which lasted 93 days. The Spanish and their indigenous allies systematically cut off the causeways, destroyed the aqueducts, and besieged the city. On August 13, 1521, Tenochtitlan fell. The majestic capital was systematically leveled, and its ruins were used as the foundation for the new Spanish capital, Mexico City. The capture of Cuauhtémoc, his eventual torture and execution, symbolized the complete end of the Mexica Empire. The collapse was a complex interplay of internal resentment, the exploited indigenous allies, superior Spanish military technology and tactics, the psychological impact of the Spanish presence, and most importantly, the devastating biological weapon of smallpox. The legacy of the Mexica Empire persists not only in the archaeology beneath Mexico City, but also in the language, cuisine, and identity of modern Mexico, a poignant reminder of the brilliant civilization that rose from the swamps to rule Mesoamerica.